All right, get in, fellas. We're going to therapy. Welcome back for our third session. We're stoked because this is the first session of the new format where each episode we're going to touch on a topic, starting definitely more learning based, and then it'll expand into more of a grab bag down the line. Today, as we heard about last week, we're going to focus on emotional expression, and the format being that I'm lucky to be joined by a guest, a friend of mine that I used to work with at the VA hospital named Kim Wanous. She's great. You'll see later why I think she's less great as we get into a little beef, but I'm going to save that for fun later. And then Richie is going to make his appearance on the show for the first time and be our example of a bro who's been in therapy, who's worked on the specific topic of the day. And we're going to be able to have a three-way interview, a triangle, right? Every interview now. So I'll be joining as somebody who's been both bro and therapist. We'll have an expert from the mental health field. And then again, a bro on. It could be anybody. I know a lot of my friends are ready to sign up, which is great. To have that format. So I think you're really going to like the fact that we have a variety of experiences, and it makes it really good for learning. Okay, so we're going to open up with our topics as we started last week, and we'll get to those in a second. Breaking down the tape. On Pardon My Take, we said goodbye to Jake Marsh, and we'll talk about on a show that's not usually very emotionally laden like that, how they did a really nice job seeking feelings. And after the interview, we're going to have a new Hall of Fame inductee. So I'm ready. I'm excited. I think this is the best episode we've done yet. And I hope to prove on that. All right, let's go. All right, team. Thanks for joining me again. Lucky to be joining you on your dog walk, your commute, you're just chilling around the house doing chores, whatever it is. Either way, however you've blended getting fellas into your life, we're happy to have you. That's the most important thing, right? So topics this week, what's been going on in the land of brodom? This isn't new this week, but it came out in the news. So we're not going to be music biased, right? We got rap in the intros, but we're going to talk country music for a little bit. And country superstar Luke Combs, probably best known for his remix of Fast Cars, just was out in the press today, and he was on an Apple podcast interview talking specifically about how he missed the birth of his child. A very vulnerable moment, obviously very difficult. And you heard him really speak on it with a sense of maturity and reflection, right? His new album coming out, it's called Fathers and Sons. And he reflects on that a little bit throughout it. So I think it's worth just going and looking at that interview and hearing somebody have a really vulnerable moment and being able to do that on such a huge stage. I think that's a really good example for us, and then also Luke, his son, his future bro, right? So thank you, Luke. And then something just throwback nostalgia. This week was the 25th anniversary of Tony Hawk landing his 900, right? So came out of left field, right? Where we're talking skateboarding today. I don't know if anybody knew. But anybody in this group played Tony Hawk Pro Skater. You remember the soundtrack 100%. And you also probably remember when Tony landed that 900, it was a huge deal. So watching Tony reflect on that, he's spoken honestly about how he broke a rib in his first few attempts of trying to land it when he was practicing. And he was really scared when he recovered and was getting back in the process of trying to land the 900 again. He had a lot of fear and hesitation. He's spoken honestly about that, about how coming back from an injury like that and you're doing something dangerous, like trying to land a trick that nobody's ever done before is a terrifying thing. And I think we all know Tony Hawk as a really funny, light guy. And he's been pretty serious when he's been reflecting on that time in these interviews this week. So definitely recommend that. If anything else, for that nostalgia of that first level of Tony Hawk Pro Skater in the kind of warehouse that I know we all remember. So get down into breaking down the tape next. We'll see you after the break. All right, and welcome back for this week's Breaking Down the Tape. It brings me much joy to be covering a clip from Pardon My Take this week. If you're an AWL like I am, which means an award-winning listener of the Pardon My Take podcast, you know what I'm going to explain to this backstory to others is that this is Barstool Sports' flagship podcast. Okay, so it comes out 3 times a week. It's extremely successful. First came out in 2016. The hosts are named PFD Commenter and Big Cat. and they're just amazing. I mean, me and my boys love it. Honestly, like a big part of the format of this show is taken and lifted from them. So the clip today comes from, they hired an intern. His name is Jake Marsh to actually just kind of make fun of Darren Rovell 5 years ago. And Jake's long-term goal has always been to get back to being a full-time play-by-play broadcaster. That's what he wants to do for his career. So he's leaving the show after having been a big part of the show for a long time. So the interview itself and Jake's announcement that he's leaving the show is about 15 minutes long. So I cut a bunch of the especially emotional and especially supportive parts of the show. To understand why this is so different is that this show is generally pretty light and definitely expresses something we'll talk about, which is it's kind of like bullying as a love language, right? These guys are all very close and obviously spend a ton of time together making the show and also give each other a pretty hard time, even though you know underneath how close they are. So just thinking about this being very different than that and the authentic and kind support. So I will pull this up and share my screen. And then when we get back, I'll talk about all the parts. I'm not going to cut in and out this time. So
you guys wanted to prove that I was a hard worker and had this great opportunity on this massive platform. But might get emotional.
It's okay.
Yeah. The fact that
here, I'll help lighten the mood.
Yeah.
Remember how bad your handshake was?
Yeah, clammy hands.
Yeah.
I watched it back the other day, and something that stuck out is one of you guys asked me, where do I see myself in 5 to 10 years? And without hesitation, I said, I want to be a national network play-by-play broadcaster.
We get something in broadcasting, and I I'll say this right now. Anyone who wants to hire Jake, you're going to hire someone who works his absolute ass off. Sorry for swearing.
It's okay.
Who's committed and he does everything the right way. And I you will always, if anyone hires Jake, you will have our support, Jake. You will have the AWL's support. We want to see you have all the success in the world. And it's one of those bittersweet moments where it's like, having you on the show for 5 years, which is more than half of the history of the show, has been awesome. Watching you grow into what you are and adapt and have to go with the flow more has been very funny and enjoyable. And I know you've grown as a person, and I do think that you will be a better broadcaster for everything you did here. I also think that you added a lot to everything we've done in the last 5 years. And I'm excited for you because I do think that, it's scary.
It's very scary.
It's scary.
I'm not going to lie. I'm scared. There is no clear cut plan for what's next.
Right.
But we've been talking. You guys have been amazing with your help in trying to make that a reality. So the plan is,
Jake first. And I'm excited, and I truly love you, and you'll always have a home here, and you'll always have our backing 100%.
Whenever you're on TV, whatever events you're doing, I know you're doing some PLL stuff.
I have a few PLL assignments this summer. Hopefully, there's some more PGA on the table as well. And like I said, perfect world. The fall comes around. There's a million college football teams and games out there and networks. Hopefully, you guys gave me the shot of a lifetime, no pun intended, 5 years ago. You really did. This is such an impossible business. It is so hard and so competitive. And you have to think of ways to get really creative to stand out. And you guys gave me that opportunity. And like I said, I'm proud of what I did with this opportunity. I have zero regrets. And now I'm just looking for someone else to give me my next shot in the booth the same way you guys did.
And you'll get one. You'll get one. And you're very good at what you do. And you put a lot of work into it. And like Big Cat said, whoever is out there, if you're listening to this show and you're thinking, well, I've got this one open spot for a game. We don't have anybody lined up just yet. Or if there's a bigger, whatever the case may be, if you're listening to this, Jake Marsh will be the best worker that you'll ever hire.
Thank you.
And
he won't do the Ray Allen tweet.
I won't.
Luck. And I look forward to seeing you do great things.
Yes.
Thank you guys. Yeah.
Flourishing.
It's a scary time, but it's an exciting time.
I told you from day one, it's the Goodwill Hunting. Then one day I hope you're just like, hey, I got it. I'm going out, and I'd be like, that's great. Leave us fucking idiots to here.
No, you guys are not idiots. You're
sitting here being idiots and losing our money.
Geniuses when it comes to sports media success.
Know. The G word is not correct.
I've told people when they listen that my target audience here is the Pardon My Take crowd. A bunch of guys who really can be emotional and are good guys and will benefit from learning this stuff because no one's just ever taught them. So some highlights of that, right? So right off the bat, they validate and tell Jake how much they appreciate his time and how hard he's worked. And all that's true, obviously, known as a really hard worker. Jake says, I might get emotional, right? Big Cat very quickly. He's one of the main hosts of the show. So, they've mentored this kid. He was 21 when they brought him on, 22, been on there for 5 years. Right now he's ready to leave the nest. So Big Cat quickly says that's okay. For him being emotional, Big Cat's a father of 3, makes a lot of sense that he'd be good at that. And then you can see that he kind of helps Jake stay on track by lightening the mood and bringing up an emotional memory without invalidating his experience, right? He doesn't bring up something that would shame him or make him feel bad for being emotional. I think he just kind of helps support and keeps the conversation going by bringing up his sweaty palm handshake from when they all first met. So we hear Jake say that he's proud of his accomplishments, and that is also very hard to do. Anybody, right? We hold ourselves to high standards. Maybe we don't get told throughout our lives that people are proud of us. And so for Jake to say that he's proud of his accomplishments at PMT and that he feels like he left it all out on the table, that's really nice. And it really is a nice thing, and not everybody can do that. So closer to the end, Big Cat pumps him up and says that anybody who hires him is going to get a great somebody who works their ass off and does it the right way. Again, very nice and kind things to say. And we also hear that Big Cat and Jake share together of validating fear of the unknown, right? Big Cat even starts by saying, like, it's scary, right, to be doing something different, leaving the secure nest of the biggest sports podcast in America to go out and you don't know what you're going to be doing, right? So how nice was that for him to say, not just to be like, you're going to be fine, dude, don't worry, right? That would be invalidating. He validates Jake by not only saying, I bet you're scared, and Jake goes, hell yeah, I am, right? So that was really a nice moment that I think we could all learn from and see how we might put that in play in our lives. Right? Towards the end, Big Cat says, I truly love you. They talk about what a difficult business sports is. And again, how Jake is so appreciative of the opportunity, which has been great. What a ride it's been. And PFT ends things too. I just like Big Cat's reference to Good Will Hunting there. Jake is kind of like the nerdy honor student on the show, full of, they like to joke lesser being. So it was only time until he left the nest. So I've been thinking about what to call the listeners of the Get In Fellas podcast, right? You're the fellas, the bros, the boys, the guys, whatever I've been saying. But I think we've just got to be the KGBs. We're the kinder, gentler bros. It rolls well. I don't know. Has anyone heard KGBs before? I guess we'll just roll with it. But it seems like it's up for grabs, right? So the KGBs from now on, and we'll see if it sticks. All right. We'll get back on the end of the break. Again, our first interview with expert bro host format. Really excited. Get ready. So super excited to bring on our first expert interview, and also the pleasure of being joined by the show's producer, Richie Davidowski. So if you were wondering what the face is behind Rambo, Jackson Davidowski, this is him. This is their owner. It's a total enmeshed relationship, just like you would expect. So thanks, Richie. And Richie's joining us for the first time today as a bro. Every expert interview, we're going to have on one of the fellas to talk about their experience in therapy and on that day's topic. And also a pleasure to be joined by Kim Wanous. You heard me say in the second episode that Kim and I used to work together. She works with military veterans, and I figured that makes her a great guest because that's a population of young men primarily who struggle with emotions. No, not hating, just telling the truth, right? We know military vets really struggle. And so hopefully this can be a resource for a lot of them. So thanks, guys, for coming.
Absolutely.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, Richie, thanks for having us. Richie, so I want to start with you, Richie. Can you share on your experience in therapy thus far, maybe when you got started, and specifically on emotional expression?
Yeah, so emotional expression is like one of the main reasons I got into therapy, and I've been in therapy now just a little over a year and a half. Took me a while to get into it because it was not covered by my insurance. Luckily, the insurance at my current job provides that to me. So
yeah, we touched on that. It always sucks when that's the case.
Exactly. Yeah. So I joined about a year and a half ago, and emotional expression was like definitely a big thing that I was struggling with, like not knowing what I was feeling and eventually feeling numb because like I didn't know how to say exactly what I was feeling. And
Numb's a word we
It-
hear a lot, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like it wasn't only affecting me, but I could see it like affecting my friendships and like the people around me. And I was like, this is definitely something I need to work on for everyone around me.
Yeah, and it constantly is, Richie, like to make you feel better. Like I talked on my own experience, and unfortunately, I can remember times where emotional expressions put an end to good romantic relationships I had, and I've worked a lot on that, and it sucks. It really sucks, you know.
Yeah.
So we're really what a pleasure, and Richie and Kim and I will all be talking about this experience we have, and hopefully normalizing it for all the guys who identify that this is tough. So, Kim Wanous joining us. Kim, I would love you to talk on, what are emotions, what are thoughts, right? This is very much episode 1. So share on the guys, like, what is an emotion?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much, Richie, for just sharing your experience, because I think that's so, so common, right? That when we are having emotions and we don't know what to do with them, we don't know how, like what they are or how to express them, that then we just shut them down, right? Or we get numb to them. I think so many people can relate to that. So emotions are these things that we feel, for lack of a better word, right? They are the one word: happy, mad, sad, glad, surprised. We feel them in our bodies. So when we're angry, which I know you guys have talked about, we're going to talk about a little bit more, that's a very physical emotion, right? Like our blood pressure rises, we get shaky, we get that adrenaline. That is a very physical emotion. But even when we're happy, we get those butterflies, we feel pretty good. Thoughts are these sentences that we tell ourselves, right? So angry, that's an emotion. This sucks, that's a thought. And it's really important in therapy. We work really hard to separate those, because sometimes when we're first getting into therapy, it can be kind of confusing, because people will be like, well, my emotion is, I feel like you suck, or I feel like you're an asshole. That's a thought. That's not a feeling, right? The feeling is anger here. Maybe the feeling's hurt. That's a thought. And so starting to separate those two, because the thoughts that we tell ourselves can really impact the emotions that we have.
Sure. And we're going to touch on this more in future episodes, Kim, but this is really the first starting point of what's called cognitive behavioral therapy. So I'm going to throw up the cognitive behavioral therapy triangle that you'll see up on the screen. And that's the idea that our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors impact each other. So we won't get too much into that today, but that is the core concept that Kim's referring to. And the first step is figuring out how to tuss those out. What is what? Because if you can't identify them separately, then you're not going to be able to use them or use the role of exercises we're going to want you to practice. Kim, in your experience, what has been the difficulty? What drives the difficulty of men expressing their emotions?
Yeah, I think number one is that it's a skill, right? And so if we have not practiced this skill, if we haven't learned this skill, then that's going to be really hard for us to know how to identify our emotions and know how to express our emotions, because we have to know what we're feeling in order to be able to express it, right? That's number one. And so part of this comes from what we've learned about emotions. And so if you've grown up with messages around emotions like crying is weak, you shouldn't do that, or, boys don't cry, any of these kinds of feelings. Or if when you got angry, they were like, great, use that, get it back out on the football field and use that anger, channel it. All those kinds of messages are going to reinforce in your brain, like your relationship with emotions. And so with that, that's going to continue for us. We don't just learn how to identify and express emotions without those kinds of messaging. And so I'm so curious for you guys sitting here, like for you, what has been your experience for why it's been difficult to express emotions outside of anger?
Well, for me, like I know growing up, all the men around me, like the only things I would see was like they would either be joking around or they were really angry. So like those were the two things that I grew up around that I saw that were like really the only things expressed by men in my life. Growing up, like I didn't know how to do any of those other things, and I'm still learning how to do those other things because of all that.
Totally.
Yeah, Richie, I totally agree. In fact, one of my friends who will be on the podcast at some point to talk about psychedelics and psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, her name's Kylie. A little bit before I got into therapy, she literally said to me, the only emotion that you are in touch with is anger. And this is like 2 years into my psychiatry residency, right? So not a great look. And there's a really good kind of stat is that more men than ever are helping with parenting and helping with parenting compared to generations before. And yet there has been no
Absolutely.
change in men's roles in the emotional aspect of parenting. So even as this gets better, our generation actually is not really doing much differently than our parents in terms of those types of tenets. Hopefully that continues to change with this younger generation, and that's all we can hope for. But, we still have a long way to go,
Absolutely.
which I think is pretty obvious.
Absolutely.
Kim,
We're hearing a lot. I think I'm still hearing a lot about how it feels weak to have emotions. And I would say when I work with men, it's very common for people to cry in my office, right? I'm a therapist. I work primarily with trauma. That's my specialty. And I go through tissue boxes like nobody's business because that's what therapists do, right? And every person coming in my office, every male, thinks they're the first person to cry in my office and they apologize, right? They're like, I'm so sorry that I'm doing this. And it's like, no, man, like this is what we fucking do here. Like, welcome to therapy.
I'm gonna point out what I've said many times already, and we'll continue to say on this podcast. It's these types of comments that show you that this will work. This will help, right? I have utter and complete faith in the men listening to this podcast that you can do these things. The hardest part is to start. Kim, when you have someone in your office who's struggling like this, or Richie, maybe you can reflect back to the start of your therapy. What do you do to help them get the ball rolling in terms of emotional expression?
Totally. Well, when it does come out, like I just mentioned, like when the tears come out or any kind of emotion, we give lots of validation that this is normal, right? I think a lot of men coming into my office, like identify the V word as a swear word, like vulnerable. That's like the big swear word in my office. And so we just validate, like, it's okay to get vulnerable in here. And that we start to build that skill, right? So I like to talk about anger as an umbrella, and I like to draw a horribly drawn umbrella and write anger on it and talk about like what is underneath. Like anger is okay. Anger is an emotion. It isn't necessarily bad, but is there something else? Is there actually hurt? Is there actually sadness? Is there actually some shame or some guilt underneath? Because if all we're doing is reacting with anger, then we're not really hitting that. And so in order to build that skill, we need a cheat sheet. And so with that, we use an emotion wheel. And so you don't have to just know the emotions off the top of your head. We're going to teach you what those emotions are.
Wheel,
oh my gosh,
clean one up on the screen for you. But just know that I'm sitting on a feelings wheel
You're
now and for every episode.
On a feelings wheel pillow.
I got that as a gift when I left my old job. Some people got it for me, and it was really cool. So thanks. Shout out.
I'm sure you didn't just buy it yourself and are very proud of it. It's fine, Steve.
I mean, I definitely would. I just didn't this one, right? So
that's great.
Yeah, and no shame.
We use the emotions wheel just to start to build that knowledge and start to label. And it can feel a little bit basic, but like that is how we start off. And it's kind of like starting to learn to color. We use like the 8 crayon box, right? Keep it really simple, like sad, mad, glad, happy, just those 8 crayons. And then we build up to like the 120 crayon box that there's all these different colors, but they are still the same shades, right? Now I have 12 shades of red, but they're all still red. And we can build up to that. We don't need to start there. I don't need you to know irritable, angry, frustrated, all these different ones. But we are going to teach you that using the feelings wheel and eventually start to notice, like, what is my body doing? And let me pick out on that what one fits for me. And then practice saying it.
Getting in touch with, and Richie brought this up, right? Like when you don't have access to these other emotions, you feel numb. So connecting the feelings and the feelings within our body as bodily cues of stress, anger, sadness, happiness, hell, right? So, and that's a really big part of the initial parts of therapy. Richie, can you jump back into, a year and a half ago? What did you do at the beginning and how did you start this process?
I mean, even still, like what Kim was saying, using like the feelings wheel, like the basic crayon box, like identifying and then going deeper. We definitely started with that. And then like another thing that we do and like still do that I found most helpful is like when I'm telling a story about a memory or talking about how I'm feeling, sitting with it in my body and identifying where it is in my body I'm feeling that. Give it a color, give it a shape, give it a texture, just something for me to recognize what it is I'm feeling. And then connecting myself, back to, the feelings of happiness or joy if I'm, ever in a situation where I'm like overwhelmed by sadness, overwhelmed by anger, anything like that, like being able to recognize that in my body and then recognizing how I can get myself through that and back to like a place of, I don't want to say neutrality, but like working myself through the
Yeah,
emotion.
I mean, it's a good point, Richie. When we're overwhelmed by really big emotions, we can't do the therapeutic work. That's the idea, right? If we're overwhelmingly sad, anxious, angry, we're not in a headspace to learn and to grow. So that is an idea, and that's a really good tangent we can go on into coping skills and positive and negative coping skills, right? Which is, again, a CBT thing I'm sure we'll touch on in later episodes. It's also a DBT thing, which we're going to get to down the road. I have this thought, Kim, and I'm interested in both of your guys' thoughts. Richie, as you think about this, I'm interested in your thoughts. When I think about addiction and behavioral patterns in people, we'll have a whole separate episode on this. The concept is we've all been in a situation where we have a feeling we wish we wouldn't have, and we do something to get rid of that feeling, or we do something to give ourselves a feeling we wish we had. Excitement, joy, and both of those pathways can lead down addiction. Right? So I like that Richie was talking on breath work, right? Breath work is a behavior that can help your feeling without like really having an addictive risk. Addictive risk things we do to help mask our feelings or give us feelings: drugs, gambling, sex, work, like workaholics, whatever, right? So those are some examples.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, even spending, right? Anything to kind of distract and avoid emotion. Such a normal thing that we do. And it comes back to that discomfort of like sitting with emotion, which I don't know if I don't know what to do with emotion, then sitting with that emotion or feeling that emotion is going to feel so much more uncomfortable. And that's where, building skills in therapy, even just labeling emotions has been shown to decrease how uncomfortable they are, decrease the intensity.
Sure.
And so it is so normal to have that urge to get rid of it and to fall into these kind of quick avoidance options. Oftentimes, while they can work short term, they can have some destructive patterns long term. Even avoiding emotions in general. I mean, you guys started off talking about impact on relationships, losing romantic relationships as a result of avoiding. That's something that I hear quite often.
Yeah, and just, I think the thing here is that people kind of get confused about why they do things at the core. And even bringing awareness to those behaviors is a huge first step. And then also when you are labeling feelings, Kim, you open the door for validation, which is the key to emotional expression and to moving down this path. Validating, if you haven't, know that word, it's the idea of telling yourself or telling someone else that the feeling they're feeling is valid. We'll get into a future episode of what happens when you're not good at that, as most people are not good at that as baseline. In fact, most people are better at it for others than they are for themselves. Right. So that's the idea, is if you throw it out there, then somebody can come over the top and be like, oh, that makes a lot of sense that you'd be pissed about this. Like, it's a pretty shitty thing that happened. Right. So just bringing that up but if you don't say anything, then nobody can help you validate it. You can't help yourself validate it if you don't put it out there. Right.
Yeah.
Especially because people tend to struggle responding to anger. And if you're in a romantic relationship where you're raging around the house, it really doesn't open the door.
Totally.
Richie, what do you think about like behaviors maybe you've done in the past and and what that looks like?
Yeah, so I used to have like a very bad temper. Like I would like fly off the handle and like just lose my cool over sometimes the stupidest little things. And like I recognize how that was like affecting my friendships, affecting my inability to like have a relationship with a significant other. And it really took like I witnessed someone with a temper very similar to mine, like flying off the handle, throwing their tools, cursing, just like being absolutely, over the top for and unhinged. Just like there's like no bringing them back. And like I was just like, man, is that what I look like when I'm in those fits of rage? This is nonsense. There's no reason to be acting like this for any of these small problems or any of these, even some of the bigger problems. That anger doesn't really produce the positive effects that you want. If anything, it does negatively affect. And I was able to, through my own breath work and sitting with myself in the emotion and just like recognizing, the weight of what I'm actually getting upset about, and just like being in that moment, recognizing the anger that's coming up, just like you said, like breathing through it. That really that was like one of the biggest things that like helped me to calm my heart rate,
Mm.
bring me back down to center, like clear my head, because when you're angry like that, you're just word vomit. You have no control over what you're saying.
Mhm.
I mean, there were times where I would literally black out. Like I would be in such a fit of rage. I was seeing red. Like I couldn't remember what I was saying or what I was doing. And I
very
mean,
normal.
Steven, yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And I mean, Steven, you've known me for
I just
like
know
a year and a
Richie
half
as
now.
like much more mild mannered, right? I've never seen
Yeah.
Richie in that state. I'm not saying it still doesn't happen to you, bro. Like, you know,
Mhm.
and Kim, I want to let you were chomping at the bit to say something about validation. And Richie, it's interesting because even within this, right, you were calling some problems small, some problems blank.
Mhm.
And right, as therapists, Kim and I would never tell a patient that a problem was small. If you feel big emotions because of it, it's a big problem for you in that moment. And after we validated it, then we can work on taking perspective and understanding that potentially it's not as big of a deal as you made it. But what would happen, Richie, if I came and you were freaking out about losing your tool or something that you could easily buy another one of, and I was just like, bro, it's no big deal, while you're in the middle of raging. Like, right, it would just set you off. It would perpetuate. It wouldn't be supportive. So,
You'd
Kim,
be
what were
throwing
you?
gas on the fire.
Yeah, exactly.
100%.
Right. That's what happens when we invalidate people's experiences. Kim, you were chomping a bit to throw something in about validation.
I was so
What do you got?
excited. So excited about validation. I love talking about it.
I call it the most important word you've never heard. That's how I refer to validation. The most important word you've never heard.
Important. Just that idea that you can also validate someone's emotion, even if you don't agree with their opinion or like that piece, that we're validating the experience, which I think is just what you gave such a good example of, Steven. I was going to use it as an example to make an Ohio State dig, but like, you know, that
Good
I
transition, Kim. We needed to get to this. So, Kim, did you get both undergrad and master's at Michigan? What was your education background?
No, just my master's. I did undergrad at University of Illinois, but you know, sometimes you have to cut off an abusive relationship in college football, and they just keep letting you down.
This is super, super sad for me. When I was working with Kim, it was like 2016, 2017, and Ohio State was in the midst. That's where I went to undergrad. I don't know if I've said that. Huge football fan. Ohio State was in the midst of their 10-year, whatever it was, dominance over Michigan. So I just made her really know it. And our debates were basically open and shut because Michigan hadn't won in forever. And now, Kim, do you have any payback for me as Michigan is national champions and on top of the world?
National champs. I love it. Well, no, because I can have empathy and validate for you, Steve, that has to be a hard time that Ohio State has
Ohio
not
State's
won
going to be
in
ranked
so
like number
many
one heading into the
seasons.
season.
I'm sure. We'll see it on the field. I can validate that it's hard, right? That it's hard to lose. And like, even when
Richie,
we don't
can we
agree,
put like a little
with your
teardrop slowly rolling down my cheek? Get it?
I'm gonna eat my words because this is a rebuilding year for us for sure. But you know,
I was just gonna say, without Harbaugh and all those 27-year-olds you had playing on the team last year, hopefully things even out because Ohio State's locked and loaded for a really good year. So, but
it's not great. But
replace our butts with hands when we're validating.
With Richie, like you were saying, like anger, I think part of with the avoidance is that anger.
Richie, he's a UConn basketball fan, and we don't need to hear anything more from Richie related to sports because he's not a Nuggets fan. And so, like, his primary teams have been hot as hell and winning titles. So Richie can get better.
You should understand the pain, Richie. You understand the pain.
I'm sure.
There's so much pain. And there's so much pain with Illinois, and I love Illinois so much. Like you were saying, like anger, I think, is such an action emotion too, that we do feel more poised on like knowing what to do with it. That when I'm angry, I know I can throw my wrench and I feel better in the moment. Whereas a lot of times, like when I feel hurt, we have that feeling of like, I don't know what to do with this to feel immediately better until I learn those skills. Or like if I scream at someone, I know I feel immediately better. But like you guys are saying, anger is such an emotion that pushes people away. It doesn't build relationships. It doesn't tend to build relationships unless I'm expressing it in a healthy way. And so when I'm lashing out, because anger is okay, behavior isn't always okay, aggressive behavior. We're looking at the difference between behavior and the emotion, but the emotion is always okay. But when I'm always expressing that emotion, then that doesn't tend to build relationships the way as like if I express I'm hurt or sad, that brings people to us. And it's really just all Inside Out for adults. Like we all need that movie.
Inside Out. What a legend. Inside Out 2. Great movie. Highly recommend. Richie, we should be careful on throwing up triangles because if we throw up the diamond sign, I don't want Jay-Z getting upset with us, you know? So assuming that Jay-Z gets his hands on this and watches at some point. So love to have you on, Jay. Kim, when you're working with patients, I'm curious that, do you have any resources you recommend? Or more so like, do you assign homework where you get that from? And what is that like? And Richie, also thinking about your experience with like homework and therapy and how common it is.
Yeah. So I primarily use like cognitive-based therapies. So I think it's so important to go to therapy and to get that time, that hour a week usually, or hour every couple of weeks. But that's such a small part of your life. And so we do really feel like homework is important to keep practicing these skills outside of the therapy room. And so we do assign homework. And a lot of that is that time to stop and check in with how you're feeling outside of the therapy room. And so the homework that I really like to assign is this breakdown of looking at thoughts, feelings, and situations. So the number one advice I have for someone starting off in CBT, Richie knows.
Totally.
The number one advice is like just to slow down, which is something that we don't do as humans, right? We're so quick to like react and feel and think and just like go about our day. And we're so quick to just feel something and go with it. With CBT, we really want to slow down and look at like, what am I feeling? And like, what am I telling myself about a situation? We're so quick to just feel like a situation made me feel something. And even I use the word feel wrong there, right? To think a situation makes us feel something. We're so quick. It's so in our culture. We're so quick to think that a situation happens and I feel something. And CBT is really going to have us slow down and be like, wait a minute, there's a step here, which is that we are interpreting all the situations that happen at any given time. And that's the triangle that you guys have seen at this point. He threw up. And looking at the situation happens, what am I telling myself? How am I interpreting this? And then what do I feel? And is this realistic? Are the facts backing this? And that really is a great tool to start to slow down and start to check those emotions rather than letting them run wild and take the wheel.
Kim doing a really nice job. We're actually this emotional expression episode is meant to kickstart us using the feelings wheel, practicing, like Richie said, getting into a headspace where you can look at the deeper emotions and practice, right? Kim pointed out that I like to call therapy sessions themselves like the laboratory where we're practicing the skills that we need to go out and put into real life. So, in bro terms, it's the practice field, and then the rest of your life is the game, right? So, you're in the weight room 1 hour a week, and then you just got to keep lifting or else it's not going to be enough. Kim's starting to touch on like how to help yourself when you're feeling big emotions or how to resolve conflict using CBT skills. And that's going to be the main focus of our next episode. So just settle in for that. But if you want to start looking up resources and things that help you practice that, please, by all means, we're going to dive deeper next episode. So Richie, do you remember like what you were doing for therapy homework early on?
Yeah. So the worksheet that Kim was referring to, I've definitely had my experience with that. With my therapist, I mean, we do some like worksheets and actual like activities. We had like a sandbox thing that we use to like I would like
grounding,
use to express
meditation,
like yeah. So I would use like that to actually I think we used it to like describe like all the things I like about myself, all the things that I don't like about myself is like how we use that. But a lot of the homework is we talk about something in therapy and she's like, okay, like when these thoughts come up like this next week, I just want you to sit with them and think about how they make you feel. And like I was saying before, recognize where they are in your body and all of that stuff. And just kind of
were you like journaling those or you were supposed to come back? Were you like journaling that? Were you supposed to come back and like share?
Log. We love logs.
My therapist, I will not lie, has been pushing me to journal, to write things down. I am very afraid of it. I will admit 100%, because once I write it down, it's real. It's there.
Yeah.
People can see it. It happened. So that's like another thing that I'm working on is like being
Appreciate
able
your honesty,
to,
Richie.
yeah.
I really
Yeah.
feel like journaling is an amazing tool because it does act as, especially when you get a little further along, it acts as therapy that you can do yourself and kind of like challenge your own inner monologue. And you just got to be free associating it, which is a therapy term. And so, but I appreciate that, Richie, to be like, I'm not even there yet, even though I've grown a ton. I just still am scared of it. And I would guarantee many of our listeners would feel the same. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Many young men out there, totally.
And that's a big thing with expressing like the emotions and everything like that I have a hard time with. Once I write it down, once I say it, it's real, it's out there. Just getting past that stigma of like, I'm allowed to actually have these emotions. I can express them and they're not permanent. Things are going to change. Like just because I feel something now doesn't mean tomorrow I'm going to feel the same way. In 2 weeks, I'm going to feel the same way. In 10 minutes, I'm not going to feel the same way necessarily. So like that's a big thing with the emotional expression. It's hard for me because I'm a very logical person. I have a degree in math. So it's like once it's out there, it's real. Emotions are like the complete opposite. It's
Richie's current relationship, and earlier in this, last episode we heard from Richie's girlfriend Maddie, and she is a speech therapist. So any therapy world person is going to be more emotionally attuned. So Richie even has the benefit of an emotionally attuned partner that he would be able to share those things with. Oftentimes, logical people and feelings people end up together. It's a pretty good combo, and so. Just noting that like when you're practicing, you can go to the people in your life. You can talk to your friends. You can talk to the women, whoever in your life, right? Your partners, not to, assume gender and sexuality stuff. So
your bros.
Because let me tell you, men of all kinds struggle with this. It has nothing to do with sexual orientation, right? So
100%. As someone who runs a lot of group with men, everyone, like somebody says the thing finally, or somebody like says the emotional thing, and everyone's like, shit, like everyone feels this way? Like, damn, I thought it was just me. And I so appreciate you guys like saying the thing out loud. And I'm curious, Richie, if you don't mind me asking, because you can always say no, but you had said that you initially went because you were struggling with this like emotional numbing or anger, and now you're talking about really working on identifying emotions. Has that helped with the anger and the expression of anger for you?
I mean, I'm definitely more cognizant like when the rage or anything that is coming up. Like I said, I've done like a lot of work to get past it, to quell those feelings, but they're totally valid still. So like I'm not trying to like shut that off completely. So being able to look at that feelings wheel and be I'm angry, but like actually I'm a little bit more specifically irritated, or this word or something else. So it's like easier for me to work through instead of just throwing rage at what I think the problem is. It's
there's no roadmap
Absolutely.
when you're doing that. You're just doing. Richie, I want to wrap up, Richie, because I think you'll have a specific message to the fellows that I've tried to bring up before. Listen to Richie talk about the beginning of his therapy experience. He didn't get in there and the therapist was like, tell me about your deepest, darkest trauma and how your mom or your daddy did blah, 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 right? Like that is something we'd like to get into and get a handle on, but that's way down the road. So Richie, can you touch on just that, I guess?
And another thing I'll touch on too later is I've had a couple therapists now. It's been 1.5 years, but I've had 3. So I'll touch on that a little bit. But like, when I started, like, I went in and I was terrified. I know I'm supposed to be here to like express my emotions and everything. But my first therapy went in, like, we just talked. She's like, what brings you here? What are you looking to work on? What are you having trouble with? We didn't go deep into anything. I would say for maybe the first 5 sessions, what could be, bringing up these feelings that I'm having? What am I struggling with? Just like in my day to day, what happened in the last week that I'm having issues with? Maybe after those 5 weeks, we recognize a pattern. This seems to make you feel this. And then we would maybe look into that. I thought the first thing they're going to do is be like, oh yeah, you weren't hugged enough as a child or something like that. It's like, and it was not even that at all.
Scary to get in touch with that stuff. I hear scary all the time.
Yeah. And like I said, I started off with this therapist. She worked with me for probably 8 months, and then she took a sabbatical. So then I had to find another therapist. I found another therapist and I worked with her for 4 weeks, and it just it wasn't a good match. I could tell in those 4
Happens.
weeks. I had such a good relationship with Haley to begin with. My second therapist, I didn't have that connection. I equated it to like feeling like I was at the principal's office, was in trouble for saying these emotions, and it was like, this isn't what I need. So I was able to like go in and change therapists again. The one I'm with now has been great. She challenges me. She listens to me. Another thing I know many guys are afraid of is like, what if I don't like the person? There's tons of therapists out there that you can you can change. If it's not meshing for you, if it's not working, there's other options. You don't have to stick with the first person that you're with.
Same for like a personal trainer, a hairstylist, your accountant, right?
Yeah.
Compare all those, right? It's a relationship, and
Exactly.
you might not like that person's style, and that's okay. Helps some people, doesn't help others.
Exactly. It's just like finding what works with you, someone who works with you. I didn't want someone who, I mean, validation is a big thing. I didn't want someone who like completely sympathized with me. Poor Richie, like she pushes back against me. She pushes back against me like, hey, think about what you just said. Think about how that affected you. So she does challenge me in those ways, and it's a way that doesn't feel combative or it's coming from.
Do you feel like, Richie, over time you've gotten better at taking that out of the therapy office and into your regular life?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Maddie, she's said to me like she's recognized like growth within me as well since going to therapy, being able to.
In the course of our friendship has been, I don't know, 9 or 10 months long. I'd say the same.
Yeah.
I had a friend. I mean, thank you to everybody listening. I've gotten such great feedback that's helping us form the future of this podcast. One friend brought up like the breaking down the tape has helped me think like, oh my gosh, I can like think about this stuff just when I'm watching TV or movies. And that's the whole point, y'all, right? Like once you start to see the world this way and think this way, you'll see it in everything. And that's more and more practice to help you have a good handle on this in your own, like more situations with your friends and family. So just shout out that Richie has noticed that, you know, we collaborate on these breaking down the tapes and the Hall of Fame and all these segments. So, you know, I've seen him understand this stuff and that's only a year and a half. Right. So just throwing out there again, this is doable. We just got to start, and really appreciate setting the stone for the next few episodes where we continue to expand on cognitive behavioral therapy concepts. Just to give you an idea, just coming down the pipe, the next episode, I mentioned we're going to do the CBT triangle in detail and talk about how to resolve when you have big emotions or do things you regret. How can we reflect on that and do better? And from there, we're going to touch on what's called cognitive distortions, which is when our mind plays tricks on us and how to challenge those thoughts. And finally, we're going to wrap up CBT with conquering our fears and using an arm of CBT called exposure response prevention, which we have a lot of experience with. So that's great, guys. Thank you so much for having our first roundtable of Expert Bro host. And this was a lot of fun. Super stoked.
Yeah, this was great.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kim. Great to see you.
Good to see you.
All right, to close out the show, we're going to induct another bro into the Bromotions Hall of Fame. And you'll notice the trend in these first 3 episodes. We're going to stick with the 3 guys who are on the clip art. So luckily, Bill Walton was able to be added by Harrison, a slip on my part. And I couldn't imagine a better contrast to having some tie-dye on there with a bunch of well-dressed men otherwise. So thanks, Harrison, for finishing that up. And this week's the final inductee of those 3 is Dr. Sigmund Freud. So I think you could all imagine that I'm just going to geek out about this one and just roll. So Sigmund Freud, born in what was Czechoslovakia of the Hungarian Empire, Austrian-Hungarian Empire at the time. He spent most of his adult life and career practicing in Vienna, Austria, where actually his family home was both his office and his daughter Anna Freud's office, one of the children to follow in his footsteps. She was really famous for developing the concept of defense mechanisms, which we're certainly going to touch on in a future episode. Freud, my guy, book back there, Little Pink Duck Freud, if you've never caught that before, is a controversial figure now. because of the way his career developed. I want to throw some realness at you about Freud and how his career developed. So he was a neurologist, and at the time there was no such thing as psychiatry, and frankly there was no such thing as therapy in the early 1900s when his practice really became huge and he became an international star. So Freud focused on trauma, and he worked with women who were showing signs of what was called hysteria at the time, which again, at the time could have gotten you locked up in a psych ward. Freud was working with these women and realizing more and more that their symptoms were often a result of sexual trauma, and often incest sexual trauma, which is crazy, obviously, and unfortunately more common than we would like to think, both at that time and now. So Freud was putting out papers about the fact that these types of symptoms were coming from sexual trauma. And sadly, the wealthy people of the day did not like hearing that Freud was calling out behaviors that were happening in their homes, as he was mostly seeing well-to-do women who could pay for his services. So, after that, he had to take a big about face. Another famous case Freud had was a wealthy family wanting him to work with their daughter, who was coming out as lesbian and wanting to, have relations with other women, which at the time was a big no-go. Certainly, right? 100 years ago. Freud met with her a few times and discharged her and told the parents, there's nothing wrong here, guys. This doesn't stress her out. This is who she is, and I think you need to deal with it. Freud does not have a reputation of being an LGBT advocate because there was really no such thing at the time. Nerdily, I had the pleasure just a few months ago of visiting the Sigmund Freud Museum in Austria, which again was the office and home of him, his daughter, and their family. I was geeking out the entire time, giggling to myself, recommending books to people. It was glorious. I don't know that you need to go all the way to Austria just for that, but if you're into mental health and really into museums, it's a really, really well done piece. So, so I just feel like I advocate for Freud because I truly believe that without him, it probably would have taken a lot longer to develop therapy and to have that kind of thing be open and mainstream. So I think we on this podcast owe Freud a lot, and also recognize that some of his stuff got off the rails and people are uncomfortable with a lot of the things he talked about, which is fair, right? And I do truly believe he was a visionary and set us up for where we are today with therapy.
And I think I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up how the end of Freud's life came about. So Freud was living in Vienna, like I said, in the 1930s. And if you're thinking what was going on in Vienna in the 1930s, you're exactly right. In 1938, Freud's house was ransacked by the Nazis and all his stuff was taken. At that point, Freud, because of his celebrity status, his daughter and a few of his staff were able to flee to England, where he actually died of cancer a few months later. The rest of his family who remained in Austria was killed by the Nazis. So luckily not the saddest ending to his life, but I think just as a realistic thing, we should point out what happened and how his life ended at the end. So otherwise, thank you, Sigmund. Thank you, Dr. Freud. I know personally you have helped form how I practice and how psychiatry and therapy are done in this country, and maybe the fact that we have therapy at all for services. So thank you, Sigmund. I want to end our show as we always do. We are going to cite our sources. I'm excited today because we actually have some real sources to cite, which we haven't really yet. The point of this is to show you guys what kind of resources we might use with our patients, where you might go if you want to learn a little more. So each episode will be a little bit different kind of based on what we do. So again, today we started our first segment on cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, right? And so the creator of that was named Aaron Beck. He was a psychiatrist at Penn, an American guy who developed cognitive and cognitive behavioral therapies when really people were just doing the kind of Freudian psychoanalysis or psychodynamic type therapy, as we call it now, that you might think of and associate with leather chairs in New York City, right? So anything at the Beck Institute, we'll put these links up, are great resources as far as CBT. Therapistaid.com is a great website for any types of practice you want to do as we go through these CBT websites. It'll have different options as far as anger, challenging conflict, challenging fears, all the stuff we're going to do the next few weeks. The main book, the OG book, if you want to read something for cognitive behavioral therapy, is called Feeling Good by David Burns. It's old. It's still what's most recommended. And I imagine if you just go to Google and find yourself like CBT workbook, you're going to find a million really good options. The VA, Veterans Affairs, has an app that actually everybody can use. It's called AIMS, Anger and Irritability Management System, or Skills, excuse me. And it's really good. They have different modules and then tools and things to practice as far as helping control your anger and irritability. And if that's kind of the primary emotion that you're working on, like I know I have in the past, and I know Richie talked about today, and I think that's a really good resource. I've used it with patients in the past when I worked at the VA.
And the most important thing we talked about today, and I'm going to flash one up on the screen, is I want everybody going to feelingswheel.com. It's a free resource. Just download a PDF of this feelings wheel that you can see in front of you, and put that bad boy on your wall. I want you to be thinking about, as this week goes, when you're feeling kind of a basic emotion like you'll see in the center, to expand that out and add, like Kim said earlier, more crayons to your crayon box, right? We're trying to go from 8 to 120 crayons, because that's going to help us not only when we're communicating with our partners, which we talk so much about, but when we're communicating with our children and our friends, right, to be able to be more descriptive. So otherwise, I thought this was a really great show, boys. So we're going to huddle up, right? We're 3 episodes in. If you have been on for all 3 of these episodes, it means you're doing a great job, and I'm super proud of you, okay? In skiing terms, every 3 times you go skiing, when you're learning, you take a step up, right? And so this is the 3rd episode. I think hopefully everyone's learned a lot. I've been getting really good feedback. Please continue to send me your feedback and your listener ask questions. I want to start getting those on social media in the next few weeks. Otherwise, hands in, boys. You know the drill. Feelings on 3. 1, 2, 3. Feelings! Peace. See you next week.